You are walking down a quiet suburban street, lost in your own thoughts, when you see a dog across the road. You don't know this dog. You have never met this dog. You have absolutely no prior relationship with this creature, no shared history, no mutual friends. And yet, somewhere deep within your biological framework, a primal, ancient force suddenly awakens. Without a conscious thought, your hand begins to rise. Your fingers involuntarily curl. Your brain bypasses all logic and sends one single, non-negotiable command directly to your muscles. Touch the dog. And before you have even processed what is happening, you are already crouched on the concrete pavement, completely abandoning your adult dignity, making a high-pitched, warbling sound you would never, ever dare to make in a professional setting. You find yourself whispering, "Hi, baby," to a stranger's golden retriever as if it is the most natural, urgent thing in the world. But let me ask you something. What if this isn't just a quirky personal habit? Imagine a dog walks into a crowded room and notice how the entire atmosphere instantly shifts. It doesn't matter if you consider yourself a dog person, a cat person, or someone who grew up on a remote farm. This is a cross-cultural, deeply neurological, and almost embarrassingly universal human behavior. We see a small, furry creature and our hands just go. Nobody instructs them to, they just go. We reach out to touch fluffy coats, soft ears, warm fur, extending this bizarre ritual to cats, bunnies, horses, capybaras, and even the occasional, very confused lizard. Why? Nobody has ever really sat down and properly explained the deep science behind this sudden behavioral hijack until now. Let's start with the most obvious question. Is it simply because animals are cute? Because that feels like the easy, comfortable answer, right? You see something adorable, you want to hold it, case closed, everybody go home. But here is where the story gets fascinating. The human impulse to touch is not just a superficial reaction to prettiness. It is a complex evolutionary trap. When you look at a creature with big round eyes, a tiny nose, chubby cheeks, and a massive forehead relative to its face, your brain is actually entering a highly specific, ancient neurological state. It triggers a caregiving circuitry that was originally hardwired into your system to ensure the survival of human infants, effectively launching a protective, maternal instinct toward an animal you met precisely 11 seconds ago in a random parking lot. Your hands are moving because your brain has just been beautifully, biologically hacked, and you are completely powerless to stop it. To understand why we are so powerless against the urge to touch these creatures, we first have to dismantle a major misconception. We like to tell ourselves that we reach out simply because animals are cute, or because we possess a superior, conscious intellect that chooses to show affection. We think we understand the animals around us, but our conventional understanding of their world and our connection to it is profoundly incomplete, if not flat out wrong. Take the domestic dog, for instance. The average person looks at a dog sniffing a patch of grass on the sidewalk and thinks, "Oh, they just have a much stronger sense of smell than we do." We reduce their reality to a mere amplification of our own senses. But that is a massive understatement. A dog doesn't just smell a more intense version of the world. A dog literally smells time itself. Because their olfactory system is so absurdly advanced, they can detect the fading scent molecules of a person who walked past that spot 3 hours ago, while simultaneously catching the fresh scent of an approaching storm miles away. They are navigating a rich, fluid chronological landscape that we are completely blind to, reading the past and the future in a single breath. And this pattern of human misinterpretation repeats across the entire animal kingdom. We look at a cat casually blinking at us from across the room and assume it's just a sleepy, passive reflex. In reality, that slow blink is a highly calibrated, evolutionarily hardwired signal of safety and profound social trust. a feline behavioral mechanism designed to de-escalate tension and communicate peace. When a dog tilts its head while looking at you, it isn't just performing a random, endearing trick for your entertainment. It is dynamically adjusting its ears to pinpoint the exact frequency and emotional resonance of your voice, while restructuring its field of vision to better read the expressions on your mouth. We constantly make the mistake of viewing animal behaviors through a narrow, human-centric lens, treating their actions as simple, amusing quirks. But the truth is, every time we interact with them, we are stepping into a complex, deeply sophisticated sensory reality. Our desire to touch them isn't just a casual habit. It is our own primitive operating system attempting to bridge the gap and interface with a wild, brilliant biological world that we are only just beginning to truly comprehend. To truly crack the code of this neurological hijack, we have to look at the precise scientific concepts that govern these interspecies interactions. This isn't just a vague emotional bond. It is a measurable psychological phenomenon dictated by evolutionary laws. One of the most fascinating concepts here is what researchers call the secure base test, a psychological paradigm originally designed to study the attachment between human infants and their mothers, but recently adapted for domestic animals. When a dog or a cat is placed in an entirely unfamiliar, high-stress environment, they experience a sudden spike in physiological anxiety. However, the moment their human owner enters the room, something remarkable happens. The animal's heart rate stabilizes, their stress markers drop, and they suddenly find the confidence to explore the strange space. The human has literally become a physical, secure base, an environmental anchor of absolute safety. But this biological tether operates on a two-way street, deeply influenced by how we perceive the animal's reality, which brings us to another brilliant scientific threshold: temporal resolution. This is the speed at which a creature's brain processes visual information from the surrounding environment. While humans perceive the world at a certain steady frame rate, many smaller animals, from birds to rodents, operate at a significantly higher temporal resolution. To them, our fastest movements appear as if they are unfolding in slow motion. When we reach out our hands to pet them, we are trying to bridge two completely different dimensions of time. Your brain recognizes this complex sensory gap, and it immediately deploys a sophisticated array of neurological tools to navigate the physical contact. The human skin is embedded with specialized mechanoreceptors, but the absolute stars of social touching are the C-tactile afferents. These are unique, ultra-sensitive nerve fibers that ignore sharp pain or heavy pressure altogether. Instead, they are tuned perfectly to detect slow, gentle stroking, specifically at a velocity of 1 to 10 centimeters per second. When you run your fingers through an animal's fur at this exact speed, these fibers bypass the logical parts of your brain and fire signals directly into the emotional processing centers. This physical interaction instantly triggers the release of oxytocin, a powerful neurochemical that floods both your system and the animal's nervous system simultaneously, establishing a mutual loop of deep biological trust. We aren't just petting an animal for a transient moment of entertainment, we are actively engaging in a highly advanced, mathematically precise neurological dialogue designed by evolution to bond two entirely different species together. This intricate neurological dialogue isn't just a theoretical framework spun by evolutionary biologists. It is a concrete, observable reality that lights up under modern medical technology. When researchers place human participants inside fMRI machines and display photographs of these expressive, soft-featured animals, the visual data doesn't just pass through the optical nerves, it triggers a profound neural event. Specific, highly primitive regions of the brain instantly ignite, namely the orbitofrontal cortex, an area heavily tied to reward processing, and deeper structures associated with emotional salience and survival-driven motivation. Your brain is actively and measurably working, evaluating the creature in front of you not as a passive background object, but as something of immense emotional significance, something uniquely worth protecting and paying attention to. What is truly remarkable is that this powerful drive completely shatters species barriers, proving that our compulsion to connect through touch is not a uniquely human eccentricity. In wild settings, primatologists have captured fascinating footage of capuchin monkeys and bonobos approaching smaller animals of entirely different species, handling them with an almost fragile gentleness, engaging in cross-species play that serves absolutely no structural survival function other than pure tactile curiosity. We saw this manifest most beautifully in captivity with Coco, the famous western lowland gorilla who mastered American Sign Language. Coco didn't just understand human concepts, she explicitly used her signs to request a pet, eventually adopting multiple domestic kittens over her lifetime. She named them herself, cradled them in her massive, incredibly powerful hands with consistent, breathtaking tenderness, and when one of her feline companions tragically passed away, she produced distinct signs for grief and crying. A massive apex primate mourning a tiny domestic cat because the simple act of touching that warm, fuzzy body had generated a bond that was intensely real. This brings us to the ultimate masterpiece of evolutionary engineering, the co-evolutionary bond between humans and dogs. Over a span of roughly 15 to 40,000 years of sharing hearths and resources, we have literally, biologically, altered each other's anatomy. Unlike wild wolves who actively avoid prolonged human gaze, domestic dogs spontaneously follow our pointing gestures and track our eyes to read our intentions. More astoundingly, dogs have developed a specific facial muscle completely absent in wolves, the levator anguli oculi medialis. This tiny muscle serves one exact evolutionary purpose. It raises the inner brow to create that wide-eyed, vulnerable, puppy dog eyes expression. It is a brilliant, highly deliberate anatomical hack. Chic, thousands of years of selection pressure favored the wolves that could look at us, trigger our ancient caregiving circuitry, and practically force our hands to reach out. Every single time you bend down to pet a dog, you are not making a casual choice. You are responding to a masterpiece of biological social engineering. Yet, as beautifully neat as this evolutionary framework appears under an fMRI scanner, we have to confront the blunt limitations of our current scientific understanding. Modern neuroscience is exceptionally skilled at mapping biological reactions. It can point to a spike in oxytocin, measure a drop in cortisol, or show a specific brain region lighting up with reward activity. But it routinely fails to capture the true, qualitative essence of the experience. We are fundamentally confusing the chemistry of the brain with the actual reality of the bond. To say we pet a dog simply because our C-tactile afferents were stimulated or because a prehistoric survival exploit was triggered is a deeply reductionist view of existence. It completely strips away the emotional autonomy of the animal and ignores the profound, unquantifiable mystery of interspecies consciousness. Moreover, this rigid biological narrative completely falls apart when we observe how these boundaries blur in the opposite direction. Evolution tells us that traits are selected purely for survival and reproductive advantage. If that is an absolute law, then how does science explain a wild, apex predator choosing to actively care for the vulnerable young of its own prey? A phenomenon documented across numerous mammalian species. Why does a dolphin swim out of its way to rescue a drowning human, or a whale shield a seal from a pod of hunting orca? These anomalies suggest that empathy and the primal urge to offer comfort through physical proximity are not just mechanical survival tricks hardwired into human infants or domestic dogs. They point to a much deeper, universal undercurrent of sentient life that science is currently unequipped to measure. Our contemporary research is also severely limited by its human-centric bias. We design laboratory experiments like the secure base test based entirely on human psychological models, forcing animals to fit into our subjective definitions of security and affection. We are essentially trying to decode a vast, ancient, nonverbal language using a highly flawed modern vocabulary. When you reach out to touch a living creature, you are not just executing a cold, mathematically predictable neurological command. You are participating in a profound biological paradox that slips right through the fingers of modern physics and chemistry, an ancient, shared consciousness that reminds us we are not isolated observers of nature, but deeply, intrinsically woven into it. This profound realization forced us to look at the space we occupy on this planet with a renewed sense of humility. For a long time, modern civilization has operated under the arrogant delusion that human beings exist completely outside of nature, that we are separate clinical observers looking down at the animal kingdom from a position of intellectual isolation. But this irrepressible urge to touch, to heal, and to connect across species barriers shatters that entire artificial boundary. It reminds us that we are not outside of the web of life. We are deeply, inextricably woven into the very fabric of it. Our nervous systems are still communicating in an ancient, silent language that predates human speech, a biological shorthand where touch is the ultimate currency of safety, trust, and mutual survival. We are not solitary masters of a wild world. We are simply mammals longing for the presence of other living things to quiet our own modern anxieties. The next time you are walking down a busy sidewalk, lose yourself in your thoughts and find your hand instinctively rising to pet a stranger's golden retriever while your voice automatically drops into that unprofessionally tender whisper. Remember that you are not just indulging a funny little quirk. You are experiencing a beautifully preserved relic of evolutionary history, a powerful biological homecoming happening right there on the concrete pavement. You are answering a multimillennial call of co-evolution that reminds your body exactly where it belongs. Perhaps the real truth hidden beneath this universal instinct is that we never actually domesticated these animals for our own separate utility. Perhaps, in the grand, sweeping arc of evolutionary history, we simply found each other in the dark, recognized a shared loneliness, and decided to domesticate each other. And maybe, just maybe, the desperate drive to reach out and touch a soft coat of fur isn't our intellect trying to control nature, but our primitive, longing soul quietly admitting that we can never truly survive this universe alone.